Good evening, this is News.PH, but it's not politics as usual. I'm Pia Ontiveros. There's a new Cold War brewing, and it's between China and the United States, at least according to Jeff Dyer of the Financial Times. For decades, China closed itself off to the world, but now it wants in again. We need to take a close look at China because it has prepared several launch pads for what Dyer says in a February 20 article is going to be the central geopolitical tussle of the 21st century, the new era of military competition in the Pacific Ocean between China and the US. And because that is the backdrop against which our little battles with Beijing over disputed territory are playing out. Here tonight to help us through this history lesson, I have to say history lesson because we have a whole generation that doesn't understand what we're going to talk about. Roy Logoles, who once was a national security advisor, a congressman who distinguished himself in defense matters, and was a naval officer having graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Thank you.
Chito Santa Romana, former news bureau chief in Beijing for many years after he had been locked out of the country by martial law. And Jose Custodio, military historian and university lecturer. Let's begin first round lang, para lang we can get a feel of why you guys are the experts on China. Let's begin with, sir, your story, Chito Santa Romana's story, about how this love affair with China began. You know, there's the, like I was saying, there's this whole generation of Filipinos who are not familiar with this story. Can you tell us how you ended up in China?
That's a long story. But that,
okay, let's pretend we have 5 hours tonight.
It goes back to 1970, 71. I guess that was the time when there was a big student movement.
First quarter storm.
The first quarter storm. That's the time the anti-Marcos demonstrations erupted. And I was one of the student leaders. I was a student of De La Salle then. I was the head of the student council and also one of the leaders of the National Union of Students. This went on for a couple of months, and actually it continued on, this whole movement against Marcos, until martial law. Yeah. But in 71, China had another type of influence in the Philippines. And at that time, it was still the time of Mao Zedong. And there was something called the Cultural Revolution in China. Yes. What was happening in China was similar to what was happening around the world. There was a student power protest in the States, anti-Vietnam protests. In Europe, there was the Paris Rebellion. So it was like the youth was in rebellion. So the influence then of China was that it presented a different kind of model for a third world country, built on self-reliance. So it aroused curiosity of young people. Okay. And then
so you were invited to go there as a student leader? Or
China was then opening up because of the anti-Soviet threat and the Nixon visit, the rapprochement between China and the U.S.
So and this was their version of the International Visitors Program.
Yeah, it was like that. They invited Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, on a secret visit, and then to other parts of the world. In the case of the Philippines, they invited a businessman's delegation. A guy named Eduardo Echaus led a businessman's group. There was a women's group of Charito Planas, and then there was a youth group. I led the group. It was like student leaders of different countries, 15 of different schools, 15 of us. While we were there, the same day or the second day after we arrived, Plaza Miranda happened. The bombing of Plaza Miranda. Yes. Okay. And Marcos started arresting student leaders, opposition leaders, and came out with a blacklist of people who would be tried for inciting to sedition. I was a student leader there, and I was charged under a certain law. So because of that, our lawyers here, Senator Jokno, Voltaire Garcia then, they advised us that we'll get you back. Just hold on first. Okay. So that's how I started my
we'll get you
stay
back.
in China.
And you came home when? 86?
They themselves got arrested in martial law. Yeah. Of the 15 of us, 10 were able to come home. They had no cases, so they were able to come home. Only 5 of us stayed.
So how long did you stay in Beijing eventually?
Okay, until the people power.
Until 86.
I came back. And then I studied in the States. I got a master's at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and I wanted to work in the Philippines, but then it was not stable. And at that point, I already started in China earlier as a freelance journalist. So I went back and said, I'll wait for a while. And while I was there, the Tiananmen story
1989?
1989, 88,
yes.
89. And ABC hired me then.
Okay, okay.
And that's how my journalism career started. And from 88, 89, all the way, I thought I'd stay only for 3 years. And then the story got bigger and bigger. And so my whole journalism career was there until I reached retirement age in 2010. That's when I came back. So it's all in all about 37 years.
You know, I hope all the young people who are listening now, you know, you guys out there, please just go Google, no? Every time they mention something, Plaza Miranda, Google it para alam nyo na. Kasi ang hirap eh, haba. We don't have 5 hours tonight. Okay. So, Roy, Secretaries, Congressman Roy Goles, you've been very busy on Facebook. You've been posting so many articles, so many comments about China.
That's you're monitoring me.
No, not at all. That's your like present pet, correct?
Well, it's an advocacy. My history in the South China Sea, now we call West Philippine Sea, or part of the South China Sea, started back in 1971. I was part of a secret mission, Navy, that transported troops, equipment, and arms to several islands that were claiming there, primarily Parola, Pag-asa, Pugad for a while. And there was even a confrontation with another force in the area. So I've been monitoring that concern. And then when I was a congressman, during my second term, the Mischief Reef issue exploded. 1994, 1995. Well, okay. Actually, between my first term and second term. And that's when I made it a major advocacy as a congressman, because I thought that it was a sea grab, a land grab by China. Mischief Reef is way within our exclusive economic zone, and they deceived the country by saying that, oh, don't worry about it, these are just temporary shelters. And they look like temporary shelters.
Yeah, right, but they were like huge.
Then Buraha died down.
That big,
after
that photograph,
years,
no?
They constructed permanent structures, garrisons. In fact, during the construction, I even had the opportunity to fly over at about 500 feet above sea level, together with a U.S. Congressman, Roro Baker. And after that, I delivered a privileged speech on what the Chinese were doing, because they were welding. Apparently, they were building permanent structures. And true enough, I was one of the first to show the complete structures already. It shocked the entire Philippines that there is a garrison there, a building almost the size of a normal municipio in a first-class municipality. So not anymore a fisherman's shelter.
Yeah, that's just a little less than 20 years ago, no?
Yeah.
And now we are at this stage.
And in 1999, I delivered a privileged speech. This is December 1999. I talked about their slow movement around the Spratlys into our exclusive economic zone, culminating with Mischief Reef. I talked about Johnson Reef, Quarteron Reef, Fiery Cross Reef. I said they're moving northward already, from south, Mischief Reef area, northward. And I said their next target is going to be Scarborough.
That's what they did.
That was in 1999. Yeah, okay. And true enough, they grabbed it April 2012.
Yeah. Again, I hope all these young people just Google it na lang. Mischief Reef, etc. Okay. And then Jose Custodio, military historian, university lecturer. You're a consultant right now to the House of Representatives Committee on...
Well, it's for Congressman anyway.
Okay. But you were also technical advisor to the U.S. Pacific Command. Can you explain that?
It all started the late 1990s, I entered the AFP as an analyst at the plans office. Then from there, I moved, I was hired as a technical advisor for a company that contracted to the United States Pacific Command.
What exactly did you do for that company, and what exactly did that company do for the Pacific Command? Assessment.
Assessments.
Oh, what a harmless word. Yes. Assessments din yan.
Assessments.
What are you assessing?
China.
China.
But at the time, there was this, when we started, there was this interest of the U.S. with China. That was in the late 1990s. They viewed China as a regional hegemon, and you had all of these things. And the U.S. was trying to build up a multilateral network to face that regional challenge by China. But that changed in the year 2001 when 9/11 happened. So with regards to my role there, China featured every now and then, but the focus was basically on the war on terrorism. Okay. But as the war on terrorism was winding down by the latter half of the first decade of the 21st century, China again started becoming newsworthy for the Americans. So,
Para bang parang nalingat tayo ng, what is that word?
Nalingat or
nalingat lang tayo
distracted.
ng konti.
9/11.
9/11 and then
they're back again. Okay.
okay.
And I remember the times that while we were so focused in the internal problems here in this country, some of us were giving out warnings that the Chinese are going to take advantage of this. And true enough, when Mischief Reef happened, that was almost 20 years ago, and now, 20 years later, as Congressman Goles has said here, things have developed in China's favor. Okay, they have seized Scarborough Shoal. They have
seized Scarborough Shoal.
It's foreign.
They've seized. You use the word seized.
I'm using the word seized to describe that. Okay, because we don't have a presence
grab
there.
is very sound.
They grabbed.
I think it's effective occupation.
That's another one also.
Effectively occupied.
Seized, effective occupation.
And we can't do anything about it, but we'll get into
We can
that.
do something about it, but there's always a political risk there, okay? There's a political, there's economic, there's a social risk to that thing.
But no military risk. We have no real navy.
The Chinese might die laughing when they see everything. That would be effective. You know?
Okay. All right. Before we go further into the discussion, I just wanted to go through this very quickly. Jeff Dyer's February 20 article in the Financial Times. It starts with an interesting, picturesque description of a scene on a beach that looks out at Yalong Bay in China. So we have employees of a Chinese subsidiary of a Swiss firm. They're on some sort of a company outing in a brand hotel on the beach. A frigate sails by so innocently because Yalong Bay also happens to be home to China's biggest naval base. Biggest, no?
It's like the Pearl Harbor.
Oh my God,
it's the equivalent
it's their
of
Pearl Harbor.
Meaning it's going to be a big naval base.
But
it's in Hainan.
It's really Hainan.
Yalong Bay.
And let me just finish this. Now, Dyer says, and I quote, Yalong Bay is where the two sides of China's rise now intersect, its deeply connected economy and its deep-seated instinct to challenge America, globalization China, and great power China. He continues, and I quote again, Yalong Bay demonstrates a different reality. It is one of the launch pads for what will be a central geopolitical tussle of the 21st century, the new era of military competition in the Pacific Ocean between China and the U.S., as we said in that introduction. Yalong Bay is their Pearl Harbor pala.
That's the concept is to build it, is to have it as a base for their nuclear submarines and in the future for their aircraft carrier.
Yeah, but it's just one of their naval bases, no?
They have several around the country.
Like several is
Qingdao, Dalian, these are major bases.
And then
subsidiary.
So Yalong is the one that they're building up now.
Okay.
The established ones are facing sort of Japan and near Taiwan. So it's very susceptible to naval interception by the U.S. So they're trying to find something in the South China Sea.
To break out of that.
In Hainan. As a way of being another major naval base.
The Chinese Navy looks really very intimidating. It's getting bigger and bigger. But their major vulnerability is the geography. The geography of China is not like the geography of like Japan, for example, which is 360 degrees surrounded by water. Not like the US, which has two coasts, the Pacific and the East Coast. In the case of Russia, the Baltic, and then the Black Sea, and then of course Vladivostok area. They could sortie from so many places, but in the case of China, their navy is working in confined waters, the South China Sea, a little of the East China Sea, where they are facing choke points. These are the things that they must surmount, notwithstanding the size of their navy. They can easily be monitored because they're working within a small area. They cannot hide, not like, let's say, the Japanese Navy during the Second World War could be anywhere. The U.S. Navy could be anywhere, like right now. The Indian Navy could be anywhere. But in the case of the Chinese Navy, PLA Navy, we know that basically they're there inside the China Sea, South China Sea, and East China Sea.
So they haven't been able to project themselves?
They have been trying to...
Even their aircraft carrier, you know, to a layman, an aircraft carrier may sound very frightening.
Yeah, it
but
is.
to the U.S. Navy, they look at it as a mere toy because it's not really modern, and it takes about 10 years to make it combat ready. But by that time, the other aircraft carriers will be more combat ready, and there are more modern aircraft carriers coming up. So it's a question of trying to catch, you know, it's a catch up game on the part of the PLA. But of course,
So
to us here, it's a big threat.
Yeah,
because,
and it's
you
very
know, we're very
frightening.
small.
Wait, you're saying that there's a lot of hype also about
For
China? It's hype. But
for the Americans, for the Americans, it's like this. They have so much capability. Okay, for example, China came up with the Liaoning, which is the aircraft carrier that they have. It's
wait,
an
wait,
old,
they can already land planes on
They
it,
can
and their
land
planes
planes.
can
They're
because
on
the
the
year
training
before,
phase.
they're still training.
yeah, but they don't have
They-
carrier
they
battle
can.
group up to now.
Okay.
Okay, so it doesn't match at all with what the U.S. has. The Nimitz class carriers are totally outclass it. But there's more. The United States came out with the Gerald Ford class, which is even a much more modern carrier than the Nimitz. So this is what the Americans have, and they're the decommissioning carriers that are even more powerful than what the Chinese have now. So, but the problem is that it's relative, okay? It's for the U.S., it's not a problem, okay? It's a distant threat, okay? China's going to be powerful sometime later, okay? But for us here,
It's an immediate threat.
it's a, as Tom Clancy would say,
Present.
it's a
It's
clear
a
and
what?
present danger.
It's a closer.
Closer.
threat.
It's a closer
We're
threat.
It's a little
And-
bit in our face, no?
And
It's
it's like,
a closer threat,
Yeah.
providing we
Very
are
geographically.
operating in isolation.
yes.
But you know,
But
we
we
are not
are-
in a vacuum. It's not going to be China between the Philippines one-on-one.
Yeah, it's going to be one on.
It could trigger repercussions, not necessarily military, but diplomatic, economic,
Trade.
political, that would have a bearing on the political standing of China and even its economic viability, because things are being monitored right now, and well, maybe they can pounce on a country like the Philippines, but it would have a cost. At the same time, of course, they're not going to be here tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll still have time to have our own area denial anti-access program
Well,
strategy.
the fighter jets are coming 18 months from now.
Yeah, 18,
We're going
yeah.
time out. We're going to time out with the Chinese.
That's not
Wait,
exactly
sandali,
what I
sandali.
have in mind.
Yeah.
What I have in mind, well, that's for conventional.
Yeah.
But I think we can better deal with China. The same way that China is trying to deal with the US now, which is anti-access.
Okay.
In other words, they want to keep the U.S. Navy about 1,500
miles away,
kilometers, 2,000, using their hypersonic missiles, which are still
Yeah, so
untested.
what
But
you
in
say,
case
how will
we
we
can
keep-
do the same thing.
Okay,
You
like
know,
how?
like land-based missile defense that can be projected all the way within our exclusive economic zone, and maybe smaller but fast watercraft.
We don't have that yet.
Well, they can be easily acquired, very
Do we have
fast,
the money for
similar.
that?
Oh yeah,
Naman
you know,
tayo.
we have the money.
Yeah,
the
we-
problem.
yes,
with
we do have the money.
The,
He duff and
problem
duck.
with
Okay.
the problem with the Philippines is that we are weak because it's our choice. But
okay.
of course, I've witnessed this. You know, I've been a congressman for 6 terms. I've seen the dynamics of how the budget is going to be apportioned. If there's a proposal to beef up the military, of course, there's a trade-off. That would mean less bridges and less
It's a bread
school
spur.
buildings, science, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the things. But now, I think using the term clear and present danger, there is now a stronger reason to have a credible defense,
Yeah.
but not the likes of frigates and multi-role fighters, but smaller, but with a big punch, you know, deadly punch that could also deter
more for
adventurism
deterrence.
on the part of
Yeah.
a big power.
Chito San, sorry, let's.
I think, though, we have to view it in terms of the Chinese mindset.
Yeah.
Their first priority, their goal in this decade, is to build their economy, to double their GDP, and to double their per capita income. So economic construction is their first goal. They don't want to go to war because that will stop the economic construction.
They don't want to go to war.
No.
So what are they doing?
What they're doing, okay, this is the peaceful development side. There is a second side to it, the core interest side. When they're challenged on what they consider as their core interests, then they respond. And the two can contradict because they're responding so aggressively, it threatens their own domestic priority.
Is this the globalization China and the great power China?
Yes. It's the struggle. You see, the core interest at the top of the list, aside from the survival of the party, is sovereignty. And unfortunately, their definition of sovereignty, their national territory, overlaps with ours. What we consider as ours, they also consider as theirs.
Yeah.
So when we say what is ours, the other side is saying what is ours too.
Yeah.
So this is the problem. And they're not yielding on that point. We should solve it through negotiation, but there is a discrepancy. We want multilateral, they want bilateral. So even on the method of they're using superiority of what has changed is that now they're not as weak as before.
Yes.
Before, when Congressman Goles would go to Pagasa or Scarborough, we could arrest them at will.
Yes.
But what we didn't see was that with China's economic rise, they were modernizing not only their navy, but their Coast Guard, maritime surveillance fleet, and they adopted this new
paramilitary.
Exactly.
Just to show you,
the tactic though has changed. It's not the use of navy against us. It's the use of the Coast Guard.
The Coast
So
Guard,
that they're using
itong latest incident, yung water cannon, civilians.
Because that skirts the MDT.
I'm not so sure about civilian, but
maritime
it's
surveillance.
not blue.
But
They
it's
are
not
blue.
Because that skirts the MDT.
Yes.
It skirts the
The
MDT.
mutual
Meaning,
defense
you're
treaty
saying
with
that
the
they're
US.
doing that so that they can avoid having the
US
come in.
So the US is going to have a conundrum now, okay? Because if you have these
Yes.
types of civilian
How
ships,
will you respond?
how do you respond?
Because the US is all navy.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
all Navy. They
No,
don't-
but remember, in the Mutual Defense Treaty,
Yeah,
it
can be a
doesn't
government
distinguish whether it's a civil on our part, whether it's a civilian ship of the Philippines or a Navy ship, because it says public vessels.
Yes,
If it's
government
a public
vessels.
vessel,
Yeah.
that means it can be Bureau of Fisheries surveying the area that could be the subject of an attack, or
Yeah.
maybe a coast and geodetic survey ship owned by the government. That still falls under the Mutual Defense Treaty,
Yeah.
including aircraft,
I know.
government aircraft.
But that's
But
why
then
the
you can just
Chinese
put
tactic,
labels, diba? Okay,
the Chinese
sorry.
tactic emanates from an ancient military strategy.
Which is,
The acme of military skill is not winning a battle by fighting, but to win a battle
By-
without firing a
Yes,
shot.
there you go.
So what are they using? Water cannons. Whether they're using seamanship, they're blocking us off. They haven't fired a shot
Yes.
on a Philippine vessel since Mischief Reef, since Pag-asa. They've done it to the Vietnamese, but not to us.
They
Especially
killed,
now, because they will pay a high diplomatic and political price if they open fire and they sink. They don't want to test the Mutual Defense Treaty. They don't want. The Americans still have the strategic primacy, meaning the U.S. is still
the
the
US
dominant,
is still the power here.
Yes.
no?
dominant power in the Asia-Pacific. What has happened is that before there was nobody that could challenge the Americans.
Yeah.
But you
now
know,
you have
Chito,
a
now-
rising power.
Chito, when you use water cannons,
That is
maybe if you
already
use-
harassment.
When you use a water cannon against
wait.
a Coast Guard
Teka,
ship, maybe
Yeah.
it won't be that damaging. But
Yeah.
if you use a water cannon against a fishing boat, that can kill some
Yeah.
fishermen.
But
there.
wait, we need to take a short
Okay.
break. We just have to take a short break. We'll be right back in 30 seconds. Welcome back. You're still watching News.PH on the Solar News channel. I'm Pia Ontiveros. Our guests tonight, former National Security Advisor Roy Logoles, former ABC News Beijing Bureau Chief Chito Santarumana, and political analyst Jose, tama ba? Political and military analyst Jose
There you go.
Custodio. Okay, Jose.
That's how the Chinese operate. Okay, Chito Santrano is correct here by saying that they're going through. They have this concept known as the unrestricted war. Okay.
Unrestricted war.
War, yeah. It encompasses an entire gamut of things that they can do, from cyber warfare all the way to even economic pressure, in order to obtain the objective of, for example,
without fighting a real war, as you were saying, no?
Without the objective of making the target pliant to it. Okay, they don't have to physically occupy it. There's a difference between China and Japan, Imperial Japan. Then in the 1930s, they wanted physical occupation. China just wants them pliant. Okay,
or Nazi Germany.
Or Nazi Germany. Okay, or Nazi Germany. They want them pliant. Okay.
No wonder some people got into trouble. Or saying, okay.
And that's why the thing here is that when you see the way they operate, okay, I doubt if they'll shoot first. Okay, but what they're going to do basically is that they're going to obstruct all the fishermen there, which they're doing. Okay, they've been harassing.
So why don't we do that?
They've been because if you go hark back to the Taiwan incident, we might end up firing the first shot.
Okay, sa Balintang Channel.
And if we fire the first shot, okay, that's, you see, the Chinese, they have, through history, they've had this strategy of they try to irritate the
Pikontalo,
ganun. And if you want to continue,
foul
baiting. It's a bit like foul baiting or laying a trap. Okay,
and then
if they use a water cannon and you fire back with a real gun or cannons, then the real Navy will come and defend their Coast Guard.
Okay.
Or in the case of Scarborough, I want to tell you this story. A Taiwanese scholar that I met in a Vietnam workshop last November told me, you know, the Chinese scholars told me what the Philippines did in Scarborough in April 2012, the Chinese were so happy. It was a manna from heaven because they were not planning to take over Scarborough. But because you tried to arrest the fishermen on a disputed area, of course we consider it ours, but the Chinese also consider it theirs. The Chinese basically employed the tactics that they wanted to do, which is to block off. They know the weakness of the Philippines, and we could not respond. And the Americans did not help us, and they were able to effectively occupy much ahead of what they were thinking as their schedule. So it fell into their laps because of a miscalculation.
So
we did not anticipate that the Chinese would respond in that way. We thought we could do our standard operating procedure from the 1900s or the past 10 years, that we could arrest them at will. We waited too long. And the Chinese Coast Guard, at this point, had now built the force. And they have pledged since 2010 that we will not let our fishermen be arrested in a dispute area.
So you're saying we mishandled that incident?
Well,
militarily and politically? Everything?
I think if we knew that there would be a pushback of such a caliber, we would probably have calibrated our move. We used right away
the Navy.
Our Navy ship.
That was the BRP.
To try to
the Navy ship just happened to be in the area.
There are circumstances to explain our position, but what I'm saying
Yes.
is that we did not calculate that the Chinese would respond in that way.
Okay.
And so we were not ready for it.
And that's how.
And that's why that's how they got it. But what I'm saying is that what they're doing now in Ayungin, in Pagasa, when the fishing season is there, they employ this like 30 fishing boats surrounded by Coast Guard, and then the Navy is behind. They're trying to see if we will do it like in the Balintang Channel. So the key is maximum restraint. And don't shoot or arrest, because they're waiting for you to do that. And if they then will pounce on you, and then we lose the islands we hold. The key should be to hold on to what we have. And to restrain ourselves, we don't start the fight. Let the Chinese be the aggressor.
What do we have there now? We lost already Scarborough Shoal.
Right.
And then
there
they're
is a
driving
way
away
to do it, but
our fishermen.
Yeah, there is
there
a way
is
to
a
do
way
it.
if we do it but we don't have the force.
Yeah.
Like the Japanese. It will be a cat and mouse game. You basically try to chase them away.
Right
They'll
now,
chase you away, but then it becomes a bigger issue. So our policy, in a sense, is good. We go to arbitration. China looks bad. It doesn't go for that. So if they're trying to peacefully rise and be a responsible power, they have to respond to the world. Why are they not peacefully resolving it? Why are they using water cannons?
Well, right now I think
fishermen.
what's good is that the fishermen are doing the fighting for us.
Yes.
And if the Navy, the Chinese Navy, or the Coast Guard, the Chinese Coast Guard will continue doing what they're doing, using water cannons. By the way, the use of the water cannons is already international news. It's all over.
Yes.
It's not just a local news item, it's all over. I've been monitoring this news, so it's a big thing. They look at it as a very provocative and bullying act of China. Doesn't make them look good. So how do we take advantage of the situation? Maybe we should encourage more of these fishermen. Thousands of them in the area.
They should just go back.
Because,
They've always been there.
That is exactly what happened in Senkakus. The Taiwanese tried to mobilize a lot of fishermen, and the Japanese Coast Guard used water cannons on them. So this tactic has been around.
They water
And then the Australians or use this,
Yeah.
Against the whaling ships of the Japanese. They have this. Both of them have water cannons. And
So
they
we
use
should
water cannons
outfit
on
our
each other.
Coast Guard boats with water cannons.
Use the strategy of being the underdog. The very small underdog in this particular case, poor fishermen who are just trying to continue their livelihood.
living.
They've been doing it for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
There in the Scarborough Shore area. Or
That is the
Bajo de
weakness of the
Masinloc.
Chinese position, that they're depriving our fishermen of livelihood. Of course, the response is that we also don't allow the Hainanese fishermen. It's a no fishing zone right now. But our fishermen have been able to go in because they need it for their livelihood.
When I looked at that, when they restricted the movement in the Scarborough Shoal, I looked at two possibilities which can fall under the International Criminal Court, ICC. Crime against humanity because they're preventing poor fishermen from pursuing their centuries-old livelihood. And of course, terrorizing the people there, since even if it's supposed to be civilian, I understand that they changed their policy sometime last year. Now the Coast Guard ships are armed, but with light arms.
Light arms.
So they're not exactly unarmed civilian ships.
This generation, again, of very young people know what they see is a China that has become very aggressive, but they're not familiar with what happened in the decades before this, diba? So I know we only have 5 hours tonight, but maybe we can squeeze it into like 4 minutes or so. Ano ba nangyari? How do we reconcile or understand China with what we see today with what we saw before?
Basically, they changed their policy or they modified it in 2008. What happened was we saw China from 1989, 1990. Those are the landmark years. 1989, Tiananmen demonstrations. The Communist Party nearly fell. The people rebelled against it, and then Berlin Wall fell. Soviet Union collapsed. So here was the Chinese leader at that point, Deng Xiaoping. He revised the policy. He said, it's a very graphic term in Chinese, let's hide the brightness of our sword and bide our time and lie low. So this is the hide and bide policy. It is during that time that the Chinese had this charm offensive. They're smiling diplomacy.
Yeah, open up to the world. And
but
stuff
then
like
they
that.
did two things. They opened up to the world, invited foreign investment, and China became, from a third world country, it became the second biggest economy. And then the second thing they did, they put part of the money into building up the military and the navy. Around why 2008, 2009, the global financial crisis. Chinese strategic planners detected a shift. No longer was the US the sole or the unipolar world, only one superpower. There are now poles of powers, the emerging powers. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That the world is becoming a multipolar world, and that it's time for China to assert itself. So now this is where it starts.
This is the milieu now.
This is why we see the aggressive face of China.
But let me quote Deng Xiaoping. You know, Deng Xiaoping delivered a speech in the United Nations April 10, 1974. And I think we should read this to President Xi Jinping. This is what he said, and I quote, "If one day China should change her color and turn into a superpower," which she almost is now, "if she too should play the tyrant in the world and everywhere subject others to her bullying, aggression, and exploitation, the people of the world should identify her as social imperialism, expose it, oppose it, and work together with the Chinese people to overthrow it." And that's exactly, in my opinion, what China is doing right now. The reverse of the thinking of Deng Xiaoping, who was supposed to be the architect of the modernization.
One thing you can say about the Chinese is that the thing is that they have this long, long history. Okay, they were great ones. Then the foreigners came in, humiliated them.
Pinahiya sila.
And so on and so forth. For example, countries, we're focusing on the South China Sea, but you see countries like this, like Russia, it ate up a lot of Chinese territory. Okay, so here you have a country with this, chip on its shoulder.
That's it.
Okay, it has a big chip on its shoulder. And it says, "Hey, you're all going down now. It's my time now." Okay. Now I could go back even from 1989. I could go back 1979. Okay. My watershed here would be the Sino-Vietnamese War. Okay, because that was an eye-opener for the Chinese. Because here was prior to that, China was up against the Indian army. Okay, it was a competent, powerful army. They beat up the Indian army in 1961. Then, earlier than that, in 1950, they took on the United Nations. They beat up also the United Nations in several battles. But here in 1979, in the Sino-Vietnamese War, when they tried to teach Vietnam a lesson, they themselves suffered a lot in the process. And that triggered moving away from Maoist tenets of warfare to embracing Western concepts, okay, and methodologies, which was frowned on before. And at that time also, because it predates, okay, the interesting thing here is that although 89 is seen as where China opened up, but even earlier, China had already opened up in terms of defense, military acquisitions, because the West was so willing to sell to China certain technologies to counter the Russians, the Soviets then, okay. So that's it. From 79 onwards, they were thinking already of building up their military to rival that of a Western power. Okay. So
okay. Wait, we'll have to take one last break and then we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching News.PH on the Solar News channel. I'm Pio Ontiveros. So wait, China wants to be included in the world now, but is this a case of the new kid in school wants to call the shots?
I'll have my input. Chito went back to 2008.
79.
Teo went up to 1970. I'll go back to the Roman Empire.
Oh my goodness, okay.
The Roman Empire.
Oh, but kids, you can still Google that, okay?
That was also the time there was Pax Romana, but there was also Pax Sinica in this part of the world. The so-called silk trade.
Okay.
You have to look at the words that the Chinese are using now. President Xi Jinping, and this was repeated by Ambassador Ma when he delivered a speech. I was there in the Rotary Club of Manila. And she said, what's the dream of China, of the Chinese? Peace, Pax.
Really? Their kind of peace.
President Xi Jinping is talking about the maritime silk trade. South China Sea to the Indian Ocean. And during the time when there was Pax Sinica, coinciding with the Roman Empire, there was the silk trade also, crossing Europe all the way to certain parts of Europe, crossing the Central Asia. So I think there's a nostalgia for that kind of peace, but it's a peace presided over by China, Pax Sinica. So now
they don't want Pax
what they're doing,
Americana.
they're enticing the world with a $10 trillion trade. Ambassador Ma lectured us in that Rotary Club of Manila saying, look, you filed a case against us in ITLUS. In Chinese culture, that is a very unfriendly act, and that and in a way she was almost saying that because of that the Philippines is not anymore a friend of China because of
Wait, so what is a friendly act to them?
I don't know. It may be a friendly act, a bilateral
joint development.
Bilateral, tayong dalawa lang mag-uusap.
where we are the definite overwhelming subordinate to them, the underdog. We were no match in the bilateral. He said there should be no multilateral. We should talk of development, joint development. Joint development, but the problem with their concept of joint development is joint development in our part of the world, not their part of the world, just like what happened in this, when they had this agreement, the trilateral agreement, where they explored the joint marine seismic undertaking here. 75% of that was within our exclusive economic zone. So that to me is the danger, but I think we are focusing too much on this part of the South China Sea, on this part of the scope of interest of China. But to me, the possible spark is going to happen not here, but there in the East China Sea, in the Senkaku Islands, where you're not talking of fishing boats, you're not talking anymore of water cannons, but ships, amphibious landing, combat ships. How many? So many hundred takeoffs in a certain period of multi-role fighters. Any miscalculation there could trigger a war in that part of the world, and
that's the real
could draw us into that quagmire.
Actually, from both the Japanese, the Chinese, or the American perspective, the real danger is in the East China Sea compared to the South China Sea. Because in the South China Sea, I mean, the Philippines, we're not looking out for war.
We're not really a threat.
We're not a threat.
We're not a threat militarily.
The Japanese can match the Chinese Navy and the
but
Chinese
we are prime
Coast Guard.
territory.
Yeah.
You see, because the Chinese.
Of course, we're prime territory. We're so helpless. They can just
And the Japanese right now is starting to rearm. They have the budget to do that. And don't forget, when even if the Japan's budget is only, let's say, about $50 billion compared to about $130 billion for China, that $50 billion is concentrated on the East China Sea, whereas China's $130 billion will have to be spread out to take care of a 2 million man standing army. There are 3 fleets.
Even their Indian Ocean
sortie. So Japan can, in my opinion, in the opinion of experts that I've been reading about, Japan can match the military capability of China in that part of the world.
Actually, it's superior to the Chinese capabilities because of training, because China is a transition
technology.
Navy. The other Japanese are already there.
Wait, so if the real problem is in the Senkaku Islands, that means we are like saling pusa?
No, we're the sideshow.
We're a sideshow.
We're the sideshow.
We used to be the main one because in April, the Scarborough, that was ahead of Senkaku's. But it shifted there a few months after. And it has remained there because basically we are weak.
And
we are no match to the Chinese.
You're talking of the second,
they shifted.
The second and the third most powerful economies of the world confronting each other in that very small piece of territory.
So the question is, will it be a short, sharp skirmish, or can it develop in the Senkakus, or will it degenerate into a long drawn out war? If it's a short, sharp skirmish, no problem. I mean, they can sort it out with their diplomats. But if it turns into a, let's say, U.S. response, Chinese response, next thing you'll see is Chinese amphibious ships heading straight to the Philippines, because they will try to.
And when you say U.S. response, you are saying that the U.S. will respond to a skirmish there.
Yeah, to a skirmish. You will see the Chinese moving here because they will try to outflank the Americans, and that's where we are, because we are this huge gap in this entire line. Because of when the bases disappeared in 1991, this Philippines became this big hole in the Americans' ring, containing whatever threat in Asia would there be.
How many hours is Manila away from the Senkaku Islands?
How many hours?
By ship?
By ship muna?
By ship, that's That's going to be a lot of
That's
hours.
Several
lot
days
of hours.
thereabouts.
maybe 1,300 nautical miles.
Several
Okay.
days thereabouts. But
Several days.
aircraft
Several days.
basically can
Aircraft.
stage off.
Yeah.
Aircraft can stage
Yeah.
No,
off.
but
because-
I doubt.
But it's
I
not.
doubt
Yeah.
whether they do that because
Yeah.
their hands they'd be
Their
so
hands
busy.
are full.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so busy.
Yeah. And do they really want to
tackling-
start a
And-
war?
No,
That's
that's
usually
my
it.
point.
Modern.
That's
Do
my
they
point.
really want
It
to
could
start the
start
And
due
if they
to
come to the
miscalculation.
Philippines,
Yeah.
But I think you have to realize the Chinese priority.
They don't-
What
Yeah.
will keep them
Oo.
from starting
And
a
is there,
long war?
is there anyone in history who starts a war and is able to end it on time? Okay, I start a war and my deadline is like
No.
1 year from now.
Napoleon for a while.
But look at
okay.
this. Look at this way. Look at this way.
until he
Let me
managed
go-
Waterloo.
Let me go to 100 years ago. Okay.
Okay.
It's kind of prophetic. Okay. In 1914, the European powers
Yeah, they
went
did
to
not
war.
want-
How did they get into war? Because of one little accident.
Which
The
was?
assassination.
The assassination of the Archduke.
France Ferdinand.
Okay.
And that's triggered an entire war
Yeah.
because of all the diplomatic relations. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's the problem here. Is that once a skirmish happens, you just don't know what will happen. So it's going to diplomats on both sides will have to figure out a way to stop it, because if they can't stop it, then all hell will break loose. Definitely.
Okay.
The Koreans can even get into the Chinese will divert the Americans.
I think
Yeah.
I think it helps though that I think American policy right now is to try to
Restrain.
cooperate with the Chinese, to talk to the Chinese, and to restrain both sides, including the Japanese.
Yeah.
And I think what is interesting is that you see one of the sparks here is the old issue of Yasukuni. There's this shrine for World War II
Yeah.
heroes,
Oo.
and the Japanese Prime Minister visited it, and there was this big anger between South Korea, China. But the Chinese, I thought, would go to have street demonstrations, would try to take one of the islands. They did not. Instead, what did they do? They asked more than 40 ambassadors of their ambassadors around the world to write letters to the editor. So they're using diplomatic and media war. They still have this cat and mouse game going on the sea around the islands. But I don't see that there is a willingness on both sides, on the Japanese or China, to go to war. And the Americans are also trying to prevent
Yeah.
a war.
Nobody wants
So
war,
because of
right?
that,
Yeah.
Although what
they
I
have to
see-
watch is the miscalculation.
What I see in the role of the
miscalculation.
Americans is that they're using the diplomatic moves, Kissinger style, but they keep on reasserting that they have an obligation under their mutual defense treaty
To
with
deter,
Japan.
to
Yeah,
deter the
China.
Chinese, to stop the
but
Chinese.
at the same time, that encourages the Japanese.
Well, they're trying to
That-
hold the
that kind of a
Japanese and
statement,
deter the,
yeah.
the Chinese.
Yeah.
This is the role they're
But wait a
playing.
minute. But the Americans sound like they're, in very simple language. They will come to the aid of Japan. But when it comes to the Philippines, parang, what's going on?
We
What's
had a
going on?
series of visits here. Admiral Grenard, the CNO, the top boss of the U.S. Navy, said that they're going to stand by their obligation
Yeah.
under the Mutual Defense Treaty.
Okay.
The other day, Admiral Harris, the commander
Harry
of the
Harris.
SINCPAC of the
Yeah.
Pacific
He's-
Fleet.
Yeah,
US,
he's Asian American pala, no? Just
Yeah,
as an
Japanese,
aside. Japanese
mother.
okay.
Japanese mother.
Yeah. But there was,
And they
Carlyle.
also reasserted.
Yeah.
Oh, Carlyle is Air Force officer. He's,
what was that? Parang,
I think he's up there in the air. He should go up there
He's
in
in
the air.
another planet.
Yeah, he's in another planet. He should go ground level. That's a
is that how
problem with an Air
is that how
Force,
the Philippine Navy regards the Air Force? That's another episode.
But this is a
Oo.
Navy theater.
But I
Yeah,
think what
okay,
is clear to me is that the Americans, again, would like to reassure us that they will back us up. But
Okay.
at the same time, they're advising us, tone down the
That's the
rhetoric,
that's-
resort to diplomacy. And then they're also doing this, they're reassuring us, they're talking about the Mutual Defense Treaty to deter the Chinese. Don't test us. Don't
No,
sink
they-
a Philippine
they-
ship.
they
Use
also-
water cannons.
They also.
Yung kaming
Unfortunately,
subukan,
unfortunately.
water can- we
But,
should use.
by the way,
Yeah.
we were talking about Japan, Philippines, China. Don't forget the other power in the West.
India.
India.
Okay.
They control the Indian Ocean. I don't think China it will take China maybe 30 years or 40 years to catch up with the power of the Indian
Yeah.
Navy in the Indian
Wait,
Ocean.
we have 2.5 minutes left. We haven't even mentioned the so-called, the famed U.S. pivot.
Well,
Yeah,
it was
to
all
Asia.
implied, everything I was talking.
Implied. That's the problem. It's always
The thing
implied.
is
But
that the Americans, as I
Jose.
said, the pivot is basically where the Americans' willingness is a diplomatic thing, a willingness to assure its allies that we're here, okay? But at the same time, it's a don't push us into war, okay? It's not a blank check for you to create problems for
drag
us,
us
okay?
into
Because they have a different, like I said, for us, it's a clear and present danger, okay? We finally realized that, okay, 20 years ago, it was still, far away, but now we finally realized
It's right.
it's right
outside
there
our
already.
By the
okay?
way, let's remember, President Obama is going to be in
April,
this part
yeah.
of the world in April. His visits, I think that includes Japan, Indonesia,
Malaysia. He's going to
Philippines,
Malaysia,
Malaysia.
So,
That is going to restructure the complexion. Let's wait for what's
Americans
going to
will-
happen.
The Americans don't want
after
to
that
have
visit.
a repeat, okay? One thing is about the Americans is they don't want a repeat of diplomatic gaffes that they've had before, okay? Like just before the Korean War, they had this diplomatic gaffe of saying, this is the defense line.
Yeah.
It excluded Korea. So here was a bright boy in North Korea saying, okay, time to invade South Korea because for the US, it's out of the defense perimeter. Same thing that happened in Iraq. Okay, you had
Okay.
this, Gillespie, if I'm correct, and she said something to Saddam, which Saddam said,
Thought was a license,
okay, it's a license to attack Kuwait. Okay, so that's the thing. So the Americans are trying to be clear to the.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a very fine line that they're driving.
Okay, we'll have to end now, but can you please just answer the question of, so what do we do in the meantime? Like what kind of, how should we deal with this, no? Because
With China?
apparently, yeah, with China, apparently we have really bad strategy
I think-
or,
Two hands.
yeah. Two hands meaning,
Deterrence, which they
Yeah.
both stress, and
which will
engagement.
take, yeah, wait,
This,
deterrence,
I
wait,
think-
deterrence will take
Deterrence,
a while.
we build our own credible military
Yeah.
force.
When you say credible,
And
Or security force,
including
security.
force, including not only the
Coast
Navy,
Guard.
but the Coast Guard.
There,
yeah,
especially with the
okay.
Coast Guard.
And-
When you say credible, sir, with what
At
we're,
least-
with what we're buying now,
That
will
is part of it.
That's
No,
part
what
of
we
it.
have to do is
We have
establish
to
presence.
supplement that with what I call asymmetrical assets.
Okay.
Like, for example, land-based missile defense, swarm tactics using swift missile boats. But in addition to a credible defense, we need to strengthen our alliances. Of course, we have the alliance with the US, but we have to make that clearer. Engagement.
But
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is all deterrence to deter the Chinese.
Yeah, engage.
Because weakness will invite aggression.
Right.
The second one is engagement.
You have to
Yes.
cooperate.
What
And
do you
this
mean
is, in the past we've stressed this without this, now we're stressing this, we don't
No.
have this. There is no high level contact now between China and the Philippines, basically because the Chinese froze us out. But we'll have to plan it. We have to maintain diplomatic consultations and open the
channels
line,
open.
the channels of communication open.
Okay.
So
okay.
that we can at least communicate the message that we do not mean to threaten China. We only want to defend our territory and that we mean friendship. We don't wish any war.
Chito,
So both of that
I-
will have to be played in a balance.
I cannot understand how we can even pretend to threaten China.
Oh, we can.
No, we can pretend to
Because
in
the
terms of-
Chinese are afraid that we will invite the Americans back with the bases and use this as a
Well,
possible base.
there will
Again,
be expanded
But that's-
presence.
That's
That's
happening
only-
already.
Yeah, but there will be expanded
I think,
presence and then, yeah, parang...
I'd like to ask
Okay,
Chito here about
wait, we have 30 seconds left, so you really must wrap up now. Okay.
East Asians have this face thing. They don't like to get humiliated.
Okay.
It's a face thing.
This is
okay?
actually one of the major factors now.
I think so far so good.
So we have to prepare.
We have to make sure that we file the memorial
Yeah.
in Itlus,
Even if
March
they've-
30,
yeah, even if they've said no.
notwithstanding all these talks that they're offering some kind of a carrot.
Okay.
Well, continue the strengthening of our military,
All right.
credible defense,
Yeah,
but
okay.
not the expensive assets, but more of the asymmetrical.
Yeah. This has been so interesting, but we really only had 1 hour, so I guess you'll have to be back
Yes, we will
for
do that.
part 2.
Yes, we shall.
Thank you very much, Jose Custodio.
Thank you very much.
Jose. Sir, Mr. Chito Santa Romana, thank you, sir, and Congressman
Thank you.
Secretary Roy Goles. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
being
thank
here.
you.
Maraming salamat. Download the Solar News mobile app on your Android and iOS devices. Hindi made in China ang Android, di ba? But iPhone.
Depends.
So you can watch the Solar News channel by live streaming and catch up on programs you may have missed. Thank you for watching. I'm Pio Ontiveros. This is News.PH. See you again next Wednesday. Good night.
So they were able to come home. Only 5 of us stayed.
So how long did you stay in Beijing eventually?
Okay, until the people power.
Until 86.
I came
Okay.
back. And then I studied in the States. I got a master's at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and I wanted to work in the Philippines, but then it was not stable. And at that point, I already started in China earlier as a freelance journalist. So I went back and said, I'll wait for a while.
Okay.
And while I was there, the Tiananmen story,
1989?
1989,
Square,
88,
yes.
89.
Oo.
And ABC
Yeah.
hired me then.
Okay, okay.
And that's how my journalism career started. And from 88, 89, all the way, I thought I'd stay only for 3 years. And then the story got bigger and bigger. And so
And
my
China
whole
got
journalism
bigger and
career
bigger,
was there until I reached retirement age in 2010. That's when I came back. So it's all in all about 37 years.
You know, I
in
hope
China.
all the young people who are listening now, you guys out there, please just go Google, no? Every time they mention something, Plaza Miranda, Google it para alam nyo na. Kasi ang
I know,
hirap
it's a lot of
hahaba ng
background.
haba. We don't have 5 hours tonight. Okay. So, Roy, Secretaries, Congressman Roy Visitors Program.
Yeah,
Parang ganon.
it was like that.
Yeah.
They invited Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, on a secret visit, and then to other parts of the world. In the case of the Philippines, they invited a businessman's delegation. A guy named Eduardo Echaus led a businessman's group. There was a women's group of Charito Planas, and then there was a youth group. I led the group. It was like student leaders of different countries, 15 of different schools, 15 of us. While we were there, the same day or the second day after we arrived, Plaza Miranda happened. The bombing of Plaza Miranda.
Yes, okay.
And Marcos started arresting student leaders, opposition leaders, and came out with a blacklist of people who would be tried for inciting to sedition. I was a student leader then, and I was charged under a certain law. So because of that, our lawyers here, Senator Jokno, Voltaire
Pepe
Garcia
Jokno,
then, they advised us that we'll get you back.
Yeah.
Just hold on first.
Okay.
So that's how I started my
We'll get you
stay
back.
in China.
And you came
But
home
then,
when? 86?
They themselves got arrested in martial law.
Yeah.
Of the 15 of us, 10 were able to come home. They had no cases. I was a student of De La Salle then. I was the head of the student council and also one of the leaders of the National Union of Students. This went on for a couple of months, and actually it continued on, this whole movement against Marcos, until martial law.
Yeah.
But in 71, China had another type of influence in the Philippines. And at that time, it was still the time of Mao Zedong. And there was something called the Cultural Revolution in China.
Yes.
What was happening in China was similar to what was happening around the world. There was a student power protest in the States, anti-Vietnam protests. In Europe, there was the Paris Rebellion. So it was like the youth was in rebellion. So the influence then of China was that it presented a different kind of model for a third world country, built on self-reliance. So it aroused curiosity of young people.
Okay.
And then
so you were
China,
invited to go there as a student leader, or
China was then opening up because of the anti-Soviet threat and the Nixon visit, the rapprochement between China and the U.S.
So
and
this
they
was the
started to
version of
open
the
up.
international visit. Good evening. This is News.PH, but it's not politics as usual. I'm Pia Ontiveros. There's a new Cold War brewing, and it's between China and the United States, at least according to Jeff Dyer of the Financial Times. For decades, China closed itself off to the world, but now it wants in again. We need to take a close look at China because it has prepared several launch pads for what Dyer says in a February 20 article is going to be the central geopolitical tussle of the 21st century, the new era of military competition in the Pacific Ocean between China and the U.S. And because that is the backdrop against which our little battles with Beijing over disputed territory are playing out. Here tonight to help us through this history lesson, I have to say history lesson because we have a whole generation that doesn't understand what we're going to talk about, are Roy Logoles, who once was a national security advisor, a congressman who distinguished himself in defense matters, and was a naval officer having graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Thank you.
Chito Santa Romana, former news bureau chief in Beijing for many years after he had been locked out of the country by martial law, and Jose Custodio, military historian and university lecturer. Let's begin first round lang, para lang we can get a feel of why you guys are the experts on China. Let's begin with, sir, your story, Chito Santa Romana's story, about how this love affair with China began. You know, there's like I was saying, there's this whole generation of Filipinos who are not familiar with this story. Can you tell us how you ended up in China?
That's a long story. But
okay, let's pretend we have 5 hours tonight.
It goes back to 1970, 71. I guess that was the time when there was a big student movement.
First quarter storm.
The first quarter storm. That's the time the anti-Marcos demonstrations erupted. And I was one of the student leaders.